He said it the way he said most things in that room, quickly, without ceremony, in the tone he used when stating obvious facts about the market. If Ava walked out tomorrow, I'd be fine. She knows that. She was standing outside the study door, still in her coat, holding a paper bag from Carmine's that had gone warm against her chest during the drive from the hospital. The bolognese he liked, the bread they only made on Tuesdays. She had called ahead and ordered it on her lunch break between a broken femur and a man who'd had a heart attack shoveling his driveway, and she'd driven 23 minutes in January Chicago traffic to be there before the food went cold. She stood very still with her hand 3 inches from the door. She listened to the rest of his phone call, and she felt something she had not anticipated. Not rage, not the particular shredding grief she might have expected. Relief. The clean, quiet, absolute relief of a woman who had been asking herself a question for 2 years and had just received, without asking, a direct answer. If you have ever stayed somewhere past the point when staying made sense, not because you were afraid to leave, but because you kept waiting for things to shift back to what they'd been, you already understand. You know the specific exhaustion of loving someone who has stopped noticing that you're doing it. Stay with this story until the end, and if it lands somewhere honest, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far these things travel. The Tuesday dinners had started 4 years ago, almost by accident. Ava had been 33, newly back from a run of 6 consecutive 12-hour shifts, and Warren had been 6 months into the most consuming stretch of building Sinclair Capital into something that could survive without his constant presence, though it hadn't yet and wouldn't for another 2 years, though neither of them knew that at the time. She'd stopped at Carmine's because she was too tired to cook, and she happened to be walking past. And she'd ordered the bolognese because it was the first thing she'd ever eaten with Warren on the night they met, when she had treated the 2-inch gash on his forearm in the ER at Northwestern. And he had asked politely, but with the easy certainty of a man accustomed to saying things that became true, whether she wanted to get something to eat when her shift ended. She had said yes. She had eaten the bolognese. She had thought he was interesting and arrogant and secretly lonely in a way he hadn't figured out yet. She had been right about all 3. So 4 years ago, standing at the Carmine's counter with her coat still on, she had ordered 2. She had driven to his office building on Wacker and handed the bag to the concierge, and Warren had texted her at 11:15 that night. You didn't have to do that. And she had written back, you hadn't eaten since the morning. I know your tells. And he had sent back a single period, which from Warren Sinclair was approximately the equivalent of a love letter. After that, it was Tuesday. Every Tuesday she could manage. Through 4 Chicago winters and 1 genuinely catastrophic tax situation, and the year their daughter Fern had croup for 6 weeks running, and Ava had been operating on 3 hours of sleep a night, while Warren flew back and forth to New York for a deal that kept almost closing, and then not closing. Even that Tuesday, she had ordered the bolognese, handed it to the concierge, and driven home to their daughter. She had done it without complaint, without tracking it, without mentioning it enough times that it became a negotiation point. It was just what Tuesday was. Except that somewhere in the last 18 months, Tuesday had started to feel different. Not obviously, not in any way she could have pointed to and said, there, that's the thing that changed. It was subtler than that. It was the concierge texting her at 10 o'clock to say that Mr. Sinclair had already left for a dinner meeting, so they'd put the bag in the conference room. It was Warren saying thank you in the morning without seeming entirely certain what he was thanking her for. It was the particular quality of absence that had settled into their house. A quiet that wasn't comfortable anymore, that had the texture of a place waiting for someone who might not be coming back. She was not a woman who catastrophized. That was not her nature. She was a doctor. She had held people's hands while telling them things that could not be untold, and she had learned early that the only useful response to hard information was to receive it clearly and figure out what came next. She had applied that same quality to her marriage. She had received the missed dinners and the rescheduled calls and the side of the bed that was cold when she woke up at 2 in the morning, and she had figured out what came next, which was, keep going, try again, give it more room. For 2 years, she had given it more room. Then she heard him on the phone, and she understood that she had run out. She set the bag from Carmine's on the small table near his study door. She walked back through the house quietly. She picked up her keys from the hook in the entryway. She got back in her car. She sat behind the wheel in the driveway for approximately 4 minutes. The street was doing what Chicago streets did in January, which was exist in a state of gray, indifferent cold that had nothing to say to anyone about anything. She watched a neighbor walk a dog. She watched a delivery truck idle at the corner. She breathed. Then she drove north. The apartment was on Wrightwood Avenue in Lincoln Park. 2nd floor, 1 bedroom, with a kitchen that looked out over a courtyard where someone had planted a pair of oak trees that were currently bare and ice-covered and somehow, despite everything, still standing. She had found it through a colleague who'd rented it to her at a rate that was reasonable and a timeline that was immediate because she had asked in October and signed in November, and it was now the middle of January, and she had been carrying the key for 11 weeks before she used it. It was not an impulsive decision. It had never been an impulsive decision. What she had taken moved out in increments over 3 weeks. Her medical school graduation photograph, the one where she was squinting into the sun outside the hospital entrance at 28, holding the frame of her diploma in both hands, laughing at something her mother had said from behind the camera. Her grandmother's recipe tin, the green one with the bent lid that had lived in 7 different kitchens. Fern's drawings, the ones taped to the refrigerator that she swapped out weekly, her daughter's current obsession being horses, all drawn with improbable optimism and approximately 15 legs each. A box of books she had been meaning to read for 2 years. She had not taken the photograph of their wedding. Not because she was punishing Warren. Because she understood that she was not the same person in that photograph as the woman who was currently parking a car on Wrightwood Avenue in January, and pretending otherwise would have been its own kind of lie. She went upstairs. She made tea. She stood at the kitchen window in her coat, still wearing it, and listened to the particular quality of a quiet that belonged to her. Warren came home to an empty house at 9:40 and did not notice. He hung up his coat, checked his phone, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, sat down at the kitchen island with his laptop, and worked until midnight. He went upstairs, was careful not to wake Ava, who, he assumed, had gone to bed early after a long shift, and he fell asleep in under 10 minutes because Warren Sinclair had always had the ability to close the door on the day. He did not reach across the bed to check. The next morning, Ava was not there. He assumed she had gotten called back to the hospital. He checked his phone. No message, but that was not unusual. She did not text during surgical hours, and she had the quiet, professional ethic of someone who did not feel the need to narrate her whereabouts in real time. He had always respected that. It occurred to him now, in the way of a thought that had been sitting in a corner waiting to be acknowledged, that he respected a great many things about Ava from a distance he had stopped noticing was a distance. He made coffee. He left by 7:15. He did not notice that her car was already gone. By the 3rd day, Ruth broke first. She was 61 years old and had cleaned and managed the Sinclair household for 6 years. With the composed efficiency of a woman who understood that her job description included seeing a great deal and commenting on very little. She had changed the sheets on a bed that had not been slept in on both sides. She had noticed, without being asked to notice, that the green recipe tin was no longer on the kitchen shelf, and that several of Fern's drawings had been removed from the refrigerator. She found Warren in his study at 7 in the morning, still in the clothes he'd slept in. He was not working. He was sitting at his desk with his coffee gone cold, looking at nothing in particular. She stood in the doorway. She clasped her hands in front of her, because she had decided somewhere between the empty shelf and the bare refrigerator magnets that she was too old to pretend she hadn't seen what she'd seen. "Mr. Sinclair," she said, "she planned this." He turned slowly. "Ava," Ruth said, with the directness of someone who was not going to soften the noun. "She didn't leave because of a fight. She left because she was finished. She'd been moving things out for at least 3 weeks, small things, things you wouldn't have counted, the recipe tin, the photograph from medical school, the drawings." She paused. "The first thing she took was the photograph of herself from before she met you." Warren looked at the desk. He was quiet for a long moment. "You watched her pack," he said. "I watched her take the things that were already hers," Ruth said, with the precision of someone who understood exactly which version of the sentence mattered. "And I didn't say anything because it wasn't my place. But you should know that she thought about this for a long time. This was not a reaction. She left him there." He sat in that office for 45 minutes without moving. He thought about the photograph. He knew which one. He had seen it early in their marriage, framed on the dresser on her side, the version of Ava at 28, squinting into sunlight. He had always found it slightly disorienting to look at, not because it was painful, but because the woman in it was laughing in a way that was completely uncomplicated. The way you laugh when you have no idea what's coming. He understood now, sitting in his study on a Thursday morning, with cold coffee and Ruth's words in the room, what had made it hard to look at. She had been happy like that before him. She had been trying to find her way back to something like it. Penn came to the office at noon. He knocked once, came in without being asked, and stood near the door with his hands at his sides, and an expression that was carefully absent of apology. "She's in Lincoln Park," he said, "Wrightwood Avenue. She rented the apartment in November. Her name, her account, everything clean. She didn't try to hide it." He paused. "She's been picking up extra volunteer shifts at the Lakeview Free Clinic, Tuesdays and Thursdays. She's been there 4 times already." Another pause. "She's safe. No one from any of the competing firms knows. I've checked." Warren looked at the surface of his desk. "You've known since when?" he said. "Day 2, Penn said. "I ran a trace when she didn't come home and wasn't at the hospital. The apartment came up in under 2 hours. He shifted his weight slightly, not from discomfort, but from the internal adjustment of a man who had decided to stand in an uncertain place. "I didn't tell you because I thought you needed to sit with the silence for a while before I handed you an address." The air in the room changed in a way that was difficult to quantify. "She looks fine," Penn said, quieter. "I had someone drive past the clinic yesterday morning. She was standing outside talking to the intake coordinator, and she was laughing at something the woman said." He stopped. "I thought you should know that. She wasn't suffering. She looked like someone who had made a decision and was living in it." Something moved across Warren's face, fast, and Penn did not name it. "Don't have anyone watch her again," Warren said. "Already pulled them. If she needs security, I know you'll handle it separately." Penn left. Warren sat at his desk for a long time. He thought about Tuesday dinners and the concierge texting him that he'd already left for a meeting. He thought about a specific night 8 months ago when Fern had a fever of 103 and Ava had been on hour 14 of a shift, and she had called him and asked him to go home. And when he'd said he was in the middle of something, she had paused, just paused, said okay, and called her colleague instead. And he had gone home 2 hours later to find Fern asleep, and Ava sitting on the edge of their daughter's bed in her scrubs with her shoes still on. And he had thought, briefly, she handles things well, and had felt relieved by this, and had gone to bed. He understood now, sitting at his desk in the afternoon, that he had confused her competence with her contentment. He had believed that because she managed everything without appearing to struggle, she must not be struggling. And because she had never once left, in 6 years she had always come back, always shown up, always sent the Tuesday dinner. He had operated on the assumption that she always would. He had confused constancy with guarantee. He opened his laptop. He found the Lakeview Free Clinic's website. He read the whole thing. He picked up the phone and called Penn. What does the clinic need that it doesn't have? Penn was quiet for a moment. You're looking at their financials? They're 990s. They're public. The medication fund, Penn said, after a pause. They've got a grant that covers overhead, but they're about $18,000 short on medication costs for the quarter. They've been absorbing it from the discretionary line. Warren wrote $18,000 on a notepad. He circled it. He did not round it up. He donated it the following morning through the family's charitable foundation, designated specifically for medication costs, and he told no one. He thought, as the transfer cleared, this is not an apology. Apologies are words, and words are what I've been failing at. It was just a gap, and he could fill it, and filling it didn't require Ava to know it was him. That felt like the right proportion, not a gesture designed to be seen. Just, there is something that needs doing, and I can do it, and I'm going to do it. He started going to the clinic on Thursdays, not to see Ava. He was honest with himself about that, at least. He took the same internal audit before a negotiation that he always took, and he told himself the truth. He was not there to engineer an encounter. He was there because Penn had told him about the gap, and because he needed to understand where the rest of the funding was going, and because, though he would have had difficulty explaining this to anyone, he needed to be somewhere that required nothing from him except showing up and being useful. He wore an old coat. He took the blue line, which he had not done in 11 years. He stood in the car, holding the overhead bar with strangers pressed in around him, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like no one in particular. Gloria, the intake coordinator, was 63, with the compact, no-nonsense warmth of someone who had spent 30 years in community health and had developed a quick, accurate read of who would actually follow through. She looked at Warren for approximately 5 seconds when he showed up asking about volunteer opportunities. "You look like a man who's never carried a box of medical supplies in your life," she said. "I've carried things," he said. "Uh-huh." She opened the door wider. "We've got a pharmacy run and intake sorting. You can start with the run. The car's in the lot." He did the pharmacy run. He sorted intake files. He moved furniture and stacked boxes. And, over the course of 3 Thursdays, made himself useful enough that Gloria stopped watching him with the careful assessment of someone deciding whether he was going to disappear and started just giving him a clipboard and a task. On the 4th Thursday, he heard her voice. She was in the back hallway, talking to a patient, an older man who was having trouble understanding his medication schedule. Ava was explaining it the way she explained things, with the focused, unhurried clarity of someone who was entirely present to the person in front of her, not performing patience, but actually practicing it. He heard her say, "Let's go through it one more time, together, as many times as you need," and he stood very still in the supply room doorway for a moment before turning back to the shelf he'd been organizing. She appeared at the end of the hallway 2 minutes later. She stopped completely when she saw him. Not a flinch, not a step back, a total, absolute stillness. The stillness of a person who has received unexpected information and is waiting for the mind to catch up to the body. "Warren," she said. "Ava." They looked at each other across 15 feet of linoleum. She was in her clinic clothes, dark pants, a navy sweater, her hair up the way she wore it when she was working, which was a bun that was less carefully constructed than the one she wore for other occasions. She looked, he thought, like herself. Not the version of herself she had been in the house on Wacker, which was a version he understood now had been a kind of held breath. She looked like the person in the medical school photograph. Unheld, present. "Gloria knows who you are," she said. "She knows my first name." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her directly. "Gloria knows what I've shown her, which is someone who shows up on Thursdays and does what he's told." Her jaw moved, very slightly. She set down the folder she was carrying, crossed her arms, and looked at him with the expression he recognized from 6 years of marriage. Not anger, not suspicion, but rigor. The expression of a person who had learned to notice the difference between what someone said and what they meant. "The donation," she said. "The clinic's published financials." We're short by exactly $18,000. Not approximately, not rounded. She looked at him steadily. You did math. There was a gap. Warren. Her voice was level. I'm not asking if you wrote a check. I'm asking what you're doing here. He thought about what he could say. He had, over the past 6 weeks, composed several versions of this conversation in his head. The version where he was articulate and clear and said exactly the right thing. He had discarded all of them because he'd recognized them for what they were. Prepared positions. And what Ava had always been, among many things, was a person who could tell the difference between a prepared position and the truth. I don't entirely know, he said. That's the honest answer. I think I'm here because I needed somewhere that required something from me that didn't have a strategic dimension, and I needed to understand where the money was going. He paused. And I think I was hoping to see you. I'm trying to be honest about the proportion. Something shifted in her expression. Not softening, exactly, more like the specific rearrangement of a face that has received accurate information and is figuring out where to put it. Gloria's voice came from the front room. Ava, the 2 o'clock is here. Ava picked up her folder. She looked at Warren for one more moment. Then she said, stay and help with the afternoon intake, and then... A pause, brief, decided, stay after. I want to talk. She walked back toward the front. He stayed. The afternoon intake ran until 4:30. He sorted files and answered phones and helped a woman complete a form she couldn't read well by reading it to her slowly, going back as many times as she needed. And he thought about Ava in the hallway saying as many times as you need, and understood that this was not a skill she had developed professionally. It was a quality she had carried into every room she'd ever been in, and he had spent 6 years accidentally flattening it into background. After the last patient left and Gloria locked the front door, Ava found him in the supply room. She sat on the edge of a table and looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked at him. The night I left, she said, tell me what you heard from the concierge. He was quiet. The concierge texted me that you hadn't picked up the food. I assumed it was a miscommunication. I went home. I assumed you were there. He held her gaze. You weren't. I assumed you were at the hospital. He paused. I didn't truly register it until Ruth told me, on the 3rd day. She absorbed this without looking away. Her face had the quality it sometimes had after a long procedure, present, a little tired, stripped of everything non-essential. I was outside your study door, she said. I heard you on the phone with Gareth. He asked something I couldn't hear clearly, and you said. She stopped. Let the silence hold it. You said if I walked out tomorrow, you'd be fine. That I knew that. I know, he said. You know, I heard. Penn told me, eventually. He held her gaze. I didn't look for the reason you left. I assumed a reason and waited for it to resolve. And when Ruth told me what had actually happened, he stopped, restarted. I sat in my office for an hour, and I could not name, accurately, when the last time was that I had treated your presence in our life as something I was choosing, rather than something I was relying on. She pressed her lips together. She looked at the wall for a moment, then back at him. The night fern had the fever, she said. He did not flinch. I know. I called you first. I know. And you said you were in the middle of something. Yes. And you have said that to me, she said quietly, on approximately 50 occasions in the last 2 years. Not meanly, not to hurt me. Just because it was true, and you never thought about what it cost me to hear it and adjust and cover for it without ever saying. She stopped. Without ever saying that I was also in the middle of something. That I was also tired. That I was holding the whole of our daughter's daily life in both hands while also working 60 hours a week, and also ordering your bolognese on Tuesdays. Because I was afraid that if I stopped, I would have to admit that I had already stopped believing it was working. The supply room was very quiet. He stood there and did not try to revise any part of what she'd said, because all of it was accurate, and she deserved the accuracy to stand without him rearranging it into something more comfortable. I didn't see it, he said. That's not a defense. That's just what happened. I didn't see it, And by the time the house went quiet enough that I had to, you had already made your decision in a way that told me everything I needed to know about how long it had actually been your decision." She looked at him for a long moment. "The papers," she said. "I filed in February. My attorney says you haven't responded." "No. That's not." She hesitated. "That's not like you." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I keep picking up the pen, and I keep not being able to finish the motion. Not to delay you, not to maneuver. I've looked at those papers 40 times. He looked at her directly. "I can't sign something that says, yes, let's conclude this because I don't believe it's concluded. And I know I don't get to decide that for you. I'm just being honest about where I am." She was quiet. Through the wall, the sound of Gloria in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, January light going thin and blue in the high windows. "I'm not the same person I was when I filed," she said slowly. "I want you to know that, because I've been watching the last 6 weeks, and I've been watching someone show up here with no audience and do unglamorous things without making them about himself. And I'm not made of stone. I see it." He said nothing. "But watching 6 weeks of someone trying is not the same as trusting that it holds," she said. "Anyone can try for 6 weeks. The question is who you are in 6 months, and who you are in 6 years, and whether the man who said what he said to Gareth on the phone is actually gone or whether he's just been quieter." "He's not gone," Warren said. "That's the thing I've had to sit with. I don't get to tell you there was a version of me who was distracted and has been replaced. I'm the same person. The same person who built the firm also started driving to a free clinic on Thursdays. I can't give you a cleaner story than that." She sat with that. Her hands in her lap were relaxed, not braced. "There's one thing I need," she said. He waited. "If you start treating me like infrastructure again, if I become something you rely on without choosing, I need you to hear me when I say it. Not in a year. Not when I've already started planning an exit. The moment I feel it happening, I need you to actually stop and hear me." "Yes," he said. "That's what I needed 3 years ago." "I know. You're asking for it now." "Yes." "That's different," she said. "I want you to understand that I know that's different." The light in the windows had shifted to the particular gray gold of a Chicago winter afternoon, giving up on itself. Gloria had gone quiet in the kitchen. The building had settled into its after-hours self. Ava stood from the table. She pulled on her coat, the navy one, the one that fit correctly. She picked up her bag. She looked at him with an expression that he recognized from 6 years of marriage, and from the person in the medical school photograph, and from the hallway this afternoon, saying as many times as you need. "Walk with me," she said. They walked out through the front door into the January cold, and the street was the street. Lincoln Park, on a Thursday evening, people moving toward home, the bare trees along the parkway, the particular smell of the lake, a few blocks east, carrying cold and something mineral and old. He did not reach for her hand. He walked beside her and let the silence be what it was, which was not empty. After half a block, she said, "Fern drew you a horse this week." He looked at her. "About 15 legs," she said, as is her practice. She was not quite smiling, almost. "She put it on the refrigerator here. She asked me if you could come see it." He stopped walking for just a moment. She kept walking. After a beat, he walked beside her again. "Can I?" he said. "Yes," Ava said. That was never in question. They walked another block in the cold, past the oak trees at the courtyard entrance, past all the ordinary machinery of an evening that was entirely indifferent to what was being renegotiated on its sidewalk. She did not say anything else for a while, neither did he. The silence had changed from the silence of someone who was absent to the silence of two people who were both present and were letting that be enough, for now, for this particular stretch of street. At the corner, she stopped and looked up at the oak trees, bare and ice-covered, standing in the courtyard with the plain persistence of things that had weathered worse. "Spring is late here," she said, half to herself. "It comes," he said. She looked at him. There was something in her face that was not the closed thing it had been in the supply room doorway, and was not the fully open thing it had been in the medical school photograph, but was something between them, the specific, careful expression of a person who has been hurt with precision and is not yet certain what to do with the particular shape of being seen again. She began walking toward the building entrance. She paused at the door with her key in her hand. "Come up," she said. "There's a horse drawing. She'll want to explain all the legs to you." He came up. The apartment smelled of the casserole Ava had left in the slow cooker that morning. Chicken and rosemary. The particular comfort of something that had been warm and waiting all day. Fern was at the kitchen table with a box of crayons and the intense, focused energy of a 6-year-old who has very specific creative plans. She looked up when the door opened, and her face went through the uncomplicated math of father plus unexpected equals good, and she launched herself across the kitchen without ceremony and wrapped both arms around Warren's legs and said, with the complete authority of someone who has been waiting to share important information, "Dad, I drew you a horse, and it has lots of legs, and that is because horses have lots of legs, and also because I gave it extra legs, because it's special." He crouched down to her level. He looked at the drawing she ran to get from the refrigerator, an extraordinary creature, crayon brown, with what appeared to be 8 legs and an expression of powerful confidence. "That," he said, "is the best horse I have ever seen." Fern considered this seriously. "I know," she said. Ava stood at the kitchen counter and watched him, and said nothing, and felt something she had almost talked herself out of feeling. Not certainty, not yet. Not the warm, uncomplicated ease of believing that everything was already resolved. Something more true than that, the particular feeling of standing on ground that had been uncertain for a long time and feeling it very quietly, very tentatively, begin to hold. She set the table for 3.